Hi everyone, my name is Caleb and I run this channel, CWL Builds. For many of you, this may be your first time seeing my face in a video because, well, I haven't shown my face in a few years on this channel. Not because I don't want to, mostly just because I don't need to. But in this video, I sort of need to start with showing my face because, well, today, I'm making a puppet of me. And you need to understand that my face is his face and, vice versa. This video is also going to be a lot longer than my normal videos, so definitely grab a snack, sit back and relax, and enjoy. Also, as another note, because this subject I'm working on is a lot larger, no offense, than the other projects I tend to work on, you're going to see parts of my workbench that you've never been able to see before, because I had to zoom out the camera lens to fit this guy in it. Again, no offense, I promise. So you're going to see some of the mess that surrounds my desk that I usually try to keep off camera, but for this, there was no other choice. Since this is my first time making a puppet like this, I'll be using a pattern by Adam Krudinger from the channel Puppet Nerd. This is a free pattern from his website, and I'll leave links to that website and the Puppet Nerd YouTube channel in the description. A lot of what I'm going to show you today I learned from Adam's videos, plus a few techniques of my own. Sadly, Adam passed away in February of 2025. I didn't know him personally, but he always seemed like such a cool guy in his YouTube videos, and they are what inspired me to make this puppet in the first place. So this puppet is for you, Adam. Thank you for all the inspiration. The base of this puppet is made using reticulated foam. It's a highly porous open cell foam, often used in outdoor furniture, filters, and in many cases, puppets. This stuff is a ½ inch thick and was the most expensive part of this build, coming in at around $30 for this 14 by 37 inch cut. I was able to find this piece at my local upholstery and foam supply shop, but you may have to order it online as not everyone has a local upholstery and foam supply shop nearby. Some of the reasons why many puppets are made from reticulated foam is that it's very lightweight, flexible, and breathable. When you've got your hand up a puppet's, puppet hole, it can get pretty hot and sweaty, so using light, breathable foam is helpful. I use the pattern to trace out what will become the head onto the foam, and then I use a sharp razor to cut out the foam. I've slightly modified the original pattern to try and make the puppet's head a bit longer to match my human head. The reason I'm using a razor and not scissors is because the razor cuts the foam at a nice, clean 90-degree cut, while scissors have a tendency to squeeze the foam while it cuts, causing an uneven edge. And you want those flat 90-degree edges so that when I glue everything together, the edges will fit nicely. Speaking of gluing together, let's start gluing this head together. It'll get glue on all the edges that aren't the mouth and neck hole, and then once it's all glued together properly, you'll start to see the head come together. For the glue, I'll be using this Weldwood contact cement. Now, normally I would use a product called Barge, which is a very high-end industrial contact cement, but that stuff comes in a very large container and is a little expensive, so for such a small project, I'm just going to use this Weldwood stuff. This stuff is a little bit harder to apply to this reticulated foam, but after trying out a few different application methods, I was able to get a somewhat even coat of this stuff on. This contact cement, like every other contact cement I've used, smells absolutely horrible, so you can probably hear in the background I have a ventilation fan going and I'm wearing a mask. I give the glue about 10 to 15 minutes to dry, and once it looks totally dry and is dry to the touch, I can start to attach everything together. This is the really nice thing about contact cement, is that it doesn't stick to really anything but itself. So when you touch the two pieces together, they almost instantly bond and create a very strong connection point. It's a great glue for specific applications like this, but the trade-off is very smelly and sometimes hard to work with. So from flat pieces of foam to the starting point of my head, you can see there's the neck hole that my hand is in, and then the face hole or the mouth hole there in the front, and it's starting to come together. To add some structure to the mouth and to give it the gift of speech through hand puppeteering, I have to add some mouth plates. I'm making mine out of a styrene cutoff, but any sturdy sheet of plastic will work. I tried finding some recycled plastic to use here, like an old container lid, but I just couldn't find anything around my apartment. I used the mouth plate pattern to trace out the shapes and then cut it out with some heavy-duty scissors. I'll add more of that contact cement to the mouth plates and also to the inside lip of the foam. After some trial and error, I found that the best way to apply this contact cement to this foam was by using the nozzle as the applicator and just squeezing the glue directly into the foam. After the glue is dry, I can attach the mouth plates to the head, and I try to inset the mouth plate by a very small amount so that I can curl the extra foam around the edge of the mouth plate and try to create a softer edge. Now, I don't know if this was totally necessary, but it did make things look a bit cleaner at least. The process for making the body is almost identical to the head, it's just a simpler pattern. It's basically just a large rectangle with a couple of curved edges on the top for the shoulders. I just cut out 2 halves of the body, and you don't actually have to flip the pattern like I did here. That's just a force of habit from all my years of sewing. You don't have to flip it because technically this foam is the same on either side, so there is no right side or wrong side. I used that same contact cement on this and then attached all the edges together that need to be attached together. So that's basically all of them except for the bottom where your hand goes. I did slightly modify this pattern for the body. I just made it a bit slimmer on either side as I am a somewhat slimmer person, so I wanted my puppet to match that. The neck hole isn't included in the original pattern because you're supposed to cut it out yourself depending on how large your hand is and what size hole you need for it. I cut the front of the neck hole slightly lower than the back, similar to how a t-shirt is cut. Now this should allow for some more natural looking neck movement, but we'll see. And here I'm just going to demonstrate how strong that bond is with the contact cement and the foam. This is after a day and a half of drying, and as you can see, it is quite thoroughly stuck here. I have to use a decent amount of strength to break it. And when it does break, you can see that it actually rips the foam in multiple places instead of just delaminating where the glue is. The next part of the body that I need to make out of foam is the hands. So I take that original pattern and I'm just going to use the top hand portion of it, and then the rest of the arm will be built later. So to build the hand, I'm going to be using some of this foam here, which isn't actually reticulated foam. It's polyurethane foam. This is a much denser upholstery foam, and I actually got it from the scrap bin at my local upholstery and foam shop. And it's a bit too thick though, so I'm going to cut it down into fourths so that I can use 2 pieces sandwiched together to make the hand. I trace out the pattern, one on each block of foam that I just cut out, and then I'll use some scissors to cut out the shape. I'm using scissors here and not a razor because the scissors have a bit more control, and these ones don't need that perfectly nice 90-degree angle on the edges as they're not being glued edge to edge. I'll also be trimming this down to a more rounded shape anyways, so the edges don't really matter. To create the interior skeletal structure of the hand, I'll be using a piece of scrap wood and cutting out this basic palm shape, and then cleaning it up with some sanding sticks. For the fingers, I'll be using armature wire, and I just round over the fingertips to make sure that they don't poke through the foam or the fabric. Then I just make 3 more, so I have 4 total, 3 main fingers and 1 thumb. I then drill the corresponding holes in the palm, 3 on the top for the main fingers, 1 on the side for the thumb, and 1 larger one on the bottom for the arm rod, which will control all of the movement of the hand and arm later on in the puppet, but that'll be like the very, very end of the video. These get a small amount of super glue just to make sure that they don't come out, and then for the arm rod, this is a small piece of copper tubing, and this fits perfectly around the outside of the arm rod that I'll use later. I oftentimes see puppet makers attaching the arm rod in directly so it's not removable, which is totally fine, but I'm going to try to make mine so that they're removable for easy storage and display. As you can see, I'm using hot glue here to attach all the parts together. I really didn't want to deal with that stinky contact cement again, and the hot glue works totally fine for this application. Especially because there really shouldn't be any pressure pulling these apart for any reason, and if that's the case, then something has gone terribly wrong. After the 2 pieces of foam are glued together, I can use my scissors to round the shape and make them look a bit more like a real hand. So there you go, 1 completed hand, and you can see with those armature wires inside, the fingers are all posable, so that I can pose them to whatever position they need for whatever the puppet is doing. Then I just build a second one to match. For the arms, I'm going to use that same foam I used for the hands, but instead of cutting them in quarters, I'm just going to cut them in half. I trace the pattern, cut them out, and then round the edges to make them look a bit more like an arm. Looking back, I should have used the reticulated foam for the arms as it's much more flexible. Most of the foam insides are complete, and now I can start adding the skin. For that, I'll be using this blue stretch fleece, and this is just a common polyester fleece. It's not the harder to find nylon Antron fleece, which was used heavily by the Jim Henson Company for many of the Muppets, Sesame Street characters, and Fraggles. Antron fleece was the preferred fabric for making these puppets because it was strong but soft, and because of the thick pile, which is the fuzz that makes fleece look the way it does, made it so that when it was sewn correctly, it was very easy to hide the seams under the pile. Also, because it was nylon, it was much easier to dye custom colors. Now, the original makers of Antron fleece stopped producing the fabric in the mid-2000s, so the only way to get it now is by purchasing old stock if you're lucky enough to find it, or by buying modern versions of it from specialized fabric makers. I wanted to try and make this entire puppet using materials I could buy in person, so that's the main reason I'm using this common poly fleece. Funny enough though, this fabric I'm using here is actually felt and not fleece because it doesn't need to stretch. The blue fleece I'm working with here is much more affordable than any other nylon fleece I could find online, and this was a remnant cut, so it was just under a yard of fabric, and it cost me about $5. If I were to make this puppet again or build it for someone as a commission, I would probably invest in the nicer nylon fleece, but for my first time, just to try it out, this commonly found polyester fleece worked totally fine. Originally, I had wanted to use a fabric that was closer to my skin tone, but since the fall of the Empire of Joann's, I'm forced to scrounge around for fabric wherever I can find it. After visiting a few craft stores that also sell a pitiful selection of fabric, I still couldn't find the right color, so I'm just going to go with blue because that seemed like fun. Also, since this was a remnant cut, I didn't have to wait in line to get a bolt of fabric cut, which saved me a bit of time, which is nice, because this entire project was built in less than a week. While I've been talking, you saw me sew together the head of the puppet, including the red felt that will become the inside of the mouth. Then I just trim the seams to make sure everything is a bit smoother once the head is in place. I've got to attach the mouth felt into the mouth plate, and since I can't sew it in place, I'll use some tacky glue to glue it together. I apply the glue on the inside of the red felt and then fold it in half and fit it to the inside of the mouth. I'm using tacky glue here and not contact cement because on this one I need to be able to adjust the placement of the felt, and this glue gives me more time to make sure everything fits well. Then once I'm happy enough with the placement of the mouth felt, I can turn everything right side out, and this is where the stretch of the fleece really comes into play. If there was no stretch, this would be very, very difficult. Also, I should have mentioned this earlier, but I apologize for all the construction noises. They are doing construction outside my window, so it'll be like that for the next few videos at least. I make the tongue using some pink felt, and I'll just glue that in place with more of that tacky glue. Now let's work on the skin for the hands and the arms. I'm starting with a large sheet of fleece here, and I'm folding it in half so the right sides are together. And when I say right sides, I don't mean like left or right, I mean the correct side of the fabric, the side that I want to be the outside once I turn this part right side out. One of these sheets will make 2 hands and arms, so I trace them out, and I also mark out a few areas to not sew so that I can turn everything right side out later. The fingers can be a little bit difficult to sew around as there's such a small area, but luckily working with a larger piece of fabric like this and then cutting it down to size can help it be a bit more manageable. So after a little bit, I was able to sew everything together, and now I just have to cut out the hands so I can continue working on them. Now I have the somewhat difficult task of getting the foam inside of the fleece. This opening here on the side will help me get the hands in place, and then the arm will enter through the back opening that will eventually be the shoulder. To start the process of getting the foam hand in place, I need to turn the fingers right side out, and I'll use this plastic tube and a pencil to help me with that. If you're trying this yourself and can't find a tube like this, go to your local boba tea place and ask for a boba straw. They're basically the same thing. Then I just have to insert the foam fingers into their corresponding fleece finger holes, which is a weird sentence to say out loud. And after a while, I'm able to get them reskinned to the point where I can turn the hand right side out, as well as turning the arm right side out. It takes a few more minutes of adjusting and moving the fleece around, but eventually I am able to get it to sit properly and look correct. Then once I'm happy enough with the hand placement and I check all of the articulation, I can work on adding the arm foam into the arm skin. Once the arm is in place, I can close the opening I used to get the hand in and close it around the tube, which is the connection point for the arm rods. I intentionally cut the foam a bit long just to make sure I had enough material, so now I can cut off the ends, round them over to make them a bit more shoulder shaped, and then close up the fleece. And there we have it, one completed arm and hand. This was definitely one of the harder pieces of this build and definitely the hardest so far. So there's one hand and arm complete, and now I just have to build a second one to match, just for the opposite side. I modified the neck pattern so it's twice as long, and that's because I want to use it as not only the neck, but also the inner lining so that my hand isn't directly touching the foam, which is a bit scratchy. I cut out the neck and lining pattern and then sew it together. It's very simple, just down the back. It's just making a tube. Then it's a very similar process to making the body. I'm using that same pattern that I used for the foam. 2 pieces of fleece, right side to right side, cut it out, and then sew it up into basically a pillowcase. About halfway through the process, I realized that this fleece cover for the body was a bit too short, and I wanted it to be a bit longer so I could fold the excess inside the body to make it look a bit nicer and to cover up the foam. So I remade it, just adding about 2.5 inches to the bottom, just enough to fold on the inside, make it look a bit nicer. Once again, because this pattern doesn't have a neck hole built in, I have to cut out a few cuts from the neck, and then I'm just going to use some hot glue and glue those down in place. I'm not sewing just because it would take a long time, and hot glue will work totally fine for this. This part of the puppet will also never be seen, so it doesn't really matter. I do the same thing to the bottom of the puppet. I cut a couple of these flaps here, and then I'm just using hot glue to attach them to the inside. The neckliner is going to cover all of this up, so this is really just to get it out of the way and hold it in place. I sew the top of the neck tube to the bottom of the head, and I do have to hand sew this because there's really no way to get a machine in here. I'm using a stitch here called a ladder stitch, which helps to close up the fabric while also turning it to the inside so you're not seeing any of the raw edges. Once the head is fully sewn in place, I can insert the neck/liner into the body and then sew it in place on the bottom. You can see here by extending that neck pattern, I can get the neck/liner all the way through to the bottom of the body. Using a simple whip stitch, I sew the neckliner to the bottom of the puppet. I sew the base of the neck to the original neck hole so that when I turn the puppet's head, the neck actually turns and stretches and doesn't just rotate in place, because it looks kind of weird just rotating in space versus stretching like a real neck would. It's finally time to start working on some facial features, and let's start with the eyes. I'm going to use some of these half wood beads that I found, and I pick out the very best one. Most of these aren't actually perfect circles, they're slight oval shaped, which is actually totally fine. Once I pick out my favorite one, I add a screw to the bottom, then add a few layers of clear spray paint to it, and then I can attach it to my drill and sand it using some sanding sponges, And I'm doing this to try and get rid of some of those wood grain lines and make it a bit smoother. I'm putting all this work into making this one eye really nice and smooth because I'm going to be using it to mold and cast other eyes. Once I'm happy with how it looks, I take the screw away and then I make a dump mold out of the bottom of a red Solo cup. I glue the original eye to the bottom and then I will make a silicone mold. I could have totally just used the original half wooden beads as the eyes, but I already had this mold making material and it was open, and if I don't use it up, eventually it'll just go bad, so I might as well use it. There are a few other benefits to casting and molding these eyes. One of them is because I'm using a white cure resin, I don't have to worry about painting these eyes white, which is nice because 1, I don't have to paint the eyes, and 2, I don't have to worry about any paint chipping off. The other nice benefit is that I can make these eyes as short or as tall as I want. The original wooden half beads that these are molded from looked a bit too large on the face, so if I pour a smaller amount of resin in, the eyes will be shorter and will look more natural sitting on the face. Now to turn these boring white circles into looking like actual eyes, I'm going to start with some eyelids. For the eyelids, I'm using some blue felt, and to attach it, more of that contact cement. I purposely chose a darker color for the eyelids so that there would be some nice contrast between them and the rest of the skin. Once the eyelids are in place, I can very carefully cut away the excess with that razor blade. Then to add even more contrast and to give sort of an eyeliner eyelash effect, I'm going to use a small strip of black felt and I'm gluing it on with more of that tacky glue. For the pupils, I'm going to try and use this sticky-backed vinyl paper, and I'll use this special hole punch here for crafting to cut out perfect little circles just to make things easier and look a bit cleaner. I definitely could have used scissors here, but I already had this tool and it's the perfect size for the pupils I need. I peel off the backing paper and then add a small amount of super glue just to really make sure that this pupil isn't going to fall off later. Using my thumb, I push the vinyl into place and then try to work out any folds or bubbles that may have formed while trying to press a flat surface onto a curved surface. And I'd say that worked out pretty well. Looks like an eye. And there's a second one to match. I really love how expressive these eyes can be depending on what angle you put them at. Like here he looks really angry, but I think I'm going to go with this sort of outturned angle. Before I can attach the eyes, I have to build and attach the nose. And I went through a few different design choices, but I think I'm going to go with this larger nose. I don't think I have a particularly large nose by any means, but I did like how the large nose looked on this guy, so that's why I went with it. I'm using that same foam I used for the arms and hands to build the nose, and once I get the basic shape cut out with a sharp knife, I can use my scissors to refine the shape. Now that the nose is the right shape, I have to cover it in fleece to match the rest of the body. I cut a piece of the fleece just larger than the nose, and then I'm going to use a running stitch to add sort of a drawstring around the outside of the piece. Since this running stitch isn't locked in place anywhere, once I pull the strings, it'll close up like a drawstring bag. I insert the nose foam, and then I close up the fabric around it, tying it in place. And to make life easier for myself, I'm just going to use some hot glue and glue this nose in place. And now that the nose is in place, I can use that as a centering point to attach the eyes. I experimented with different placements of the eyes, and I found that right here at the sort of top of the nose seemed to look the best. And once again, I'm going to use hot glue to attach these. Now, you may not have noticed at the beginning of the video, but I am not bald. I have quite a lot of curly brown hair, so let's give this guy some curly brown hair as well. I'm sort of prototyping this as I'm building it, but it did end up working in the end, so here's what I did. I'm basically building a second scalp for this guy using more of that same fleece. And then I'm going to attach the hairs to that fleece and then attach everything to the top of the head. Once I get the basic shape sewn in place, I can refine it and add the areas around where the ears are going to go. For the actual hairs themselves, I'm going to be using some of this polyester yarn, and I just have to make it curly to match my hair. I'm going to use a technique I saw online for making curly doll hair. I take this polyester yarn and I tie it on the end of a wooden dowel and then wrap it up tightly around the entire dowel, then tie off the other end. So I have a dowel that is completely wrapped in this polyester yarn, and I do the same to a bunch of other wooden dowels I have because I need quite a lot of hair for this. Then to actually make it curly, I'm going to soak this in water till it's fully saturated. Then I'm going to bake it in the oven for 15 minutes at 350 degrees, and I should be left with nice curls the same size as the dowel. So I'm going to head over to the kitchen and see if I can't make some curly hair. And while that's baking, I'm going to slightly modify this toddler's craft t-shirt I got because it's a great size for my Muppet. It's just a bit too long. So I'm going to hem the bottom with my sewing machine. Once my yarn sticks are out of the oven, they look almost exactly the same, but once I cut off the ends and start to unwrap them, you can see it actually worked out really well. I have some great little curls that will work for my puppet. So I repeat this step quite a few times and then cut them down into a bit more manageable hair pieces. And now that we're in the hair making process of the video, I think it's a great time to give a shout out to all my patrons over on my Patreon. Thank you all so very much for the support. So now I just need to figure out a way to attach all of the hairs to the scalp, and here is what I came up with. I'm using a scratch awl here and I'm punching holes in the scalp, and then I'm using a crochet hook, threading through the hole, and then using the hook of the crochet hook to grab the center of each piece of yarn. So the yarn pieces are basically folded in half and then locked into the scalp, so each one piece of yarn will make 2 pieces of hair. And me figuring out that 1 piece of yarn can make 2 pieces of hair sped up this process twice as fast, which is nice because this entire process of making the hair and adding the hair and everything like that took me a full day and a half of off and on work. This isn't necessarily a very hard process, it's just very time consuming and repetitive. Throughout the process, I did find ways to speed things up, including using my drill to wind up the yarn. That sped up the process a bit, and then just faster ways of punching the holes and threading the yarn. At this point, I decided I'd added enough hair. I wasn't counting, but if you want to pause here and count, please be my guest. And here's what it looks like on the other side. It's looking like a full head of hair, which is nice. And now I just need to attach all of these in place. Right now, these are just held in place by the friction between the fabric and the yarn. And if I pull on them, they'll come right out. And I don't want that. So I go through and I hand sew each individual yarn base into the fabric to lock it in place. I thought about using glue, but this just seemed like the best way to keep everything flexible and not make a mess. And just a friendly reminder, if you are enjoying this video, please do consider dropping a like, consider subscribing, commenting, sharing, all of that fun stuff that helps the YouTube algorithm pick up these videos and actually show them off to more people. And thanks for sticking around long enough to make it 30+ minutes into a video of me making a blue puppet. After doing a quick test fit, I realized there was a few bald spots, especially around the center part, so I added about a dozen more new pieces of yarn, and now I just have to attach it to the head. I used the ladder stitch to sew the front of the scalp in place, and then I just use hot glue on the rest because the rest you don't really see since it's all covered up by hair. Originally, I didn't actually know if I was going to make ears or not because I knew that, at least with my hair, you don't really see my ears ever, so I wasn't sure if you would on the puppet as well. I ended up deciding that I did need ears, so I make some quick little ears using more of that reticulated foam and some fleece. Then, using the glue that is hot, I attach the ears in place. I'm happy that I added the ears because you can see them in the final puppet, and it does help cover up that seam line in the hair a bit. Then the last step is just to bring my little guy out to the hair salon and give him a bit of a style. I'm using Mod Podge and Mod Podge water to try and lock the curls in place so that they don't come undone with time, and to keep the hairstyle the way it is because it matches how I style my hair. I use quite a few different products for my hair. Mod Podge is not one of them, but I think it'll work great for what I'm going for with his hair. And while he relaxes in the salon, I can build the arm rods. This is just a 6-inch piece of wooden dowel, and I drill a hole the same size as the arm rod, slightly off center. The rod itself is made from an 1/8-inch piece of brass rod cut to 14 inches. I attach the rod, and the reason it's offset like this is so you can rest your thumb on top. The handles and rods get painted black, and I also paint the connection points black as well. This just helps them be a little less noticeable. So there we have it, a fully complete puppet of me. And I've never made a puppet like this before, but I think I did a pretty good job. And honestly, I think I did such a good job that I think you can just take over the rest of the video. Me? Yeah, you. You're basically me, right? Yeah, I'll just give you my mic and you can do the rest of the outro. And anyways, you were quite the mess to make. So there's lots of threads and fuzz and such that I have to clean up. So you take over the outro and I'll head back inside and start cleaning up. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I certainly enjoyed being, created and all. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, put them down in the comment section, and he'll try to respond to those. I know this was a much longer video, so thanks for sticking around all the way through. I think this is like a 35-minute plus video or something like that. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next video.